let me ask you a question about voting in America, okay? There are multiple bills that have been posed to basically counteract the effects of some of these policies around various states. Do you believe, and I gotta just ask you as a sensible person, do you believe that some states are going too far in passing voter restriction laws that adversely affect certain demographics in their state?
Yes, I do believe that we all have the right and the privilege to vote. And I think that there needs to be, everyone needs to have that ability. I live in a state where we don't check voter ID. However, there are people still on the rolls from neighbors of mine for the past 20 years that don't live there anymore. I don't think Massachusetts is a place where there is voter fraud. If there is, it's very little, and it could be from, who knows what party. I'm not saying it's even going on. I think, we do need to have some restrictions in place that are smart. Or not restrictions, I shouldn't say restrictions. I think that we need to make sure that, people are registered to vote, that you're who you say you are. I think that we need to keep polls open longer. I think that the day of election day is great, but I know for me, myself, I'm a mom, I'm a working mom, I've got 3 kids. Who knows if on that first Tuesday in November, if someone's gonna get sick or someone's gonna break a leg and I'm not gonna get to vote. In Massachusetts, up until this year, it was impossible to even get an absentee ballot. So even for a legitimate cause, you would have to be out of the state, not on the other side of the state, literally out of the state.
Jennifer, so why are Republicans doing this? Why are Republicans passing laws to restrict voting, utilizing the fabricated pretext of massive voter fraud? Because you don't believe in the big lie, right? You don't believe massive voter fraud took place.
I don't believe that massive voter fraud took place.
Now, all of these states, these state legislatures, these Republican-led state legislatures are all, 100% of them, are all passing voter restriction laws based on their proclamation that massive voter fraud took place. Now, Jennifer, you're a Republican. You're a Republican strategist. Are you holding your party accountable to the truth, or are you sitting back saying nothing and allowing the big lie to permeate and destroy the political movement known as the Republican Party?
Yeah, I think it's actually really bad for us. I think there are some distinctions. I look at Georgia and I know that everyone, that was the start of it, and that's what everyone was pointing to at first. But I think the intention there truly was to make the voting better and easier and not more restrictive by extending the early voting time, by having weekends. Listen, I have been in politics for 30 years. You can't stand someplace and campaign for I know here in Massachusetts, I was a candidate. You can't stand right in front of the polls with your signs. You have to be a certain amount of space away. Not being able to provide food and water, too bad, bring your own food and water. There's no regulation against that. So, I think it depends on where they're going with this, but I don't want this to go back. And I'll tell you, I'm a woman. We only got our right to vote in the 1920s, right? I mean, it's not like this is something that any person should take for granted, because it could easily be walked back on any of us.
Okay, so let me correct you on a few things here. Senate Bill 202, which is the state Senate bill you're referring to in the state of Georgia, it did not extend weekend voting. Here's what it did. You have a few counties that always show up for Black lawmakers or Black candidates and Democratic candidates. Those counties are DeKalb, Fulton, Clayton. Always show up 100% of the time, okay? Those counties have an extensive weekend voting regimen and early voting regimen. What the state of Georgia did is they created a uniform policy that mandated all 159 counties to engage in weekend voting, but it created a cap for how many they can do that only adversely affected places that showed up for Democrats, because now they are limited on how many weekends they can offer. Here's another thing they did. They de facto eliminated what's called souls to the polls or Sunday voting. where they wrote in the law that the county would have to make a decision to offer Sunday voting or Saturday voting, but they could not offer both. Now, what sense does that make if not simply to stop the program of souls to the polls? And let me correct you on another point. The issue of bringing food and water to a precinct line has now been criminalized through the statute. So it is against the law to bring someone food or water who's waiting in line to vote in the state of Georgia, when it was already against the law to campaign to that individual in the state of Georgia. The reason why they made it against the law to bring someone food or water is because nonprofit organizations and churches would run commercials and say, if you come to this precinct that has a history of long lines, don't worry, we got you. We will give you food and water. Not partisan. They're not promoting a candidate. They're not breaking the election laws. So they made that action against the law to stop those commercials from encouraging people to come out and vote. Do you understand the nuance here? They did not expand people's right to vote or people's access to voting. They limited people's access to voting in highly Democratic, highly Black populated counties. Are you with me on that?
I get that, and so my understanding is that there's a longer time frame to vote, so you have more days to vote. But also, I don't agree. I don't think that anyone should be given food or water while they're standing online.
Why?
Your job is to go vote.
Wait a minute.
Go vote and get out of there.
Come on now, madam.
No,
madam, you're a trained attorney. You think it's a good idea?
Yes, and I definitely think it's political. It is a political
so
motive.
Let's go back to the basics.
Give someone food or water and wink at them.
Jennifer, I only have a few minutes, okay? You are in agreement that we need to make it against the law to hand somebody a drink of damn water who's waiting in a line. It don't matter what line you're waiting in.
If you're working with a campaign or a nonprofit.
No, that's not what the law says, Jennifer. The law does not distinguish if you work with a campaign or not. The law simply says the action itself is illegal. And the action itself should never be deemed illegal. Just handing someone a bottle of water, not campaigning, is against the law in the state of Georgia. Do you agree with that?
If I went to give you a bottle of water as my friend, and I just gave you a bottle of water, that is different than me going through the line and handing out everyone a bottle of water.
Under the statute in Georgia, even doing that, Jennifer, and I want you to read the statute, it doesn't have to be organized. Even if you walk in line and hand your friend, hand your mama, hand your grandmother a bottle of water, it is against the statute as written.
Okay, that's not the interpretation out there, but I will go back and reread that statute and make sure. But the way that I interpreted it was that if it is organized by a nonprofit, which I run a nonprofit, and so
nonprofits, 501c3s are non-political, madam. 501c3s are non-political. They're
not political, but there is always a training sense. There's always candidates. There's always someone that you're supporting. And if I walked over, me personally, in the city of Boston, to a bunch of people I knew in line, I could understand how that would be deemed inappropriate and political because of the stuff that I do. And so I think that there is a distinction to be made. And I think that it is, if you're going to give your mom a bottle of water, that's a very different part and a different role than if the person who runs Planned Parenthood or works at Planned Parenthood, but it doesn't say Planned Parenthood, but is known in the community, is sitting in the back.
Yeah, but that's not what the law says. Jennifer, you're getting into what aboutism. Everything you're saying is not what the law says. The law simply makes the behavior, the activity of handing someone a snack or handing someone water in line without engaging in campaigning, without engaging in electioneering. It makes that illegal. Say that again.
You know how we solve this? We now get into term limits where we limit the amount of time that people can be in elected office.
Yeah, I'm good with that.
And then we will eliminate all the BS that goes on. Yeah. Because if we start taking people out, then no one will be able to be in office long enough to actually care about this.
Jennifer,
and I think that is a nonpartisan issue.
Yeah, and I gotta say this, I have to wrap. Another way to get rid of BS is to get rid of those damn Trumpites in your party. I appreciate you so much, all right? Thank you for being on Indisputable.